The sand is gone. Not pulled by tides, not stolen by storms. Gone. Swallowed whole. The earth simply opening its mouth and taking it. A stretch of Florida's coastline that millions of people walked barefoot just 72 hours ago now sits behind yellow caution tape. Underwater, collapsing into a darkness that nobody mapped, nobody predicted, and nobody can stop. This is not a natural erosion cycle. This is not seasonal beach loss. What is happening along Florida's Atlantic coast right now is something geologists have quietly feared for 30 years and never wanted to see in their lifetimes. Because beneath the paradise, beneath the sunscreen and the hotel pools and the vacation photographs, Florida has always been sitting on a lie, a hollow one, and it is finally caving in. March 3rd, 2026, 5:14 in the morning. Before a single tourist wakes up for sunrise, before the coffee shops open, before the lifeguard chairs are dragged to the shoreline, a maintenance worker named Daniel Arroyo is doing a pre-dawn inspection of the seawall at Boca Raton's South Beach when the flashlight beam catches something that stops him mid-step. The beach is shorter than it was yesterday. Not by inches, by feet. A section running nearly 80 meters along the waterfront has simply dropped, not eroded outward toward the ocean, but collapsed downward. A clean, vertical drop of roughly 4 feet that cuts through the sand like a blade. The palm trees at the edge lean inward at a grotesque angle. A volleyball net that was anchored in the sand the evening before now hangs over open air, its poles dangling into a depression that should not exist. Arroyo calls it in. His supervisor drives out. His supervisor calls the county. The county calls the state. And by 6:45 in the morning, Florida's Division of Emergency Management is issuing its first closure notice of what will become the most destructive coastal geological event in the state's recorded history. Because Daniel Arroyo's collapsed seawall is not a local anomaly. It is the first visible crack in something enormous. By 9 a.m., bathymetric survey teams, specialists who map the ocean floor, are deployed up and down a 43-mile stretch of coastline. What they find in the data shocks even the veterans. The seafloor is not where it should be. In 11 separate locations, depth readings are registering between 20 and 55 feet deeper than every existing nautical chart shows. The ocean floor has dropped. Silently. Catastrophically. Overnight. These are not erosion trenches. Erosion works slowly, laterally, leaving gradual slopes. What the sonar is detecting are near vertical walls, the edges of collapsed cavities, sinkholes, but not on land, where Florida's insurance industry has spent decades battling their consequences. These sinkholes are offshore, beneath the ocean, and several of them are migrating toward the beach. Dr. Catherine Voss, a Karst geologist at Florida Atlantic University, is called in by mid-morning. She pulls the survey data, stares at her screen for a long moment, and then says something that will be repeated in emergency briefings for the next 72 hours. This is the aquifer system communicating, and it is not whispering anymore. To understand what is happening, you have to understand what Florida actually is. Most people think of it as a state. Geologists think of it as a platform, a massive ancient limestone shelf that formed over tens of millions of years as marine organisms died, compacted and calcified on the ocean floor. The entire peninsula is essentially a slab of porous rock, riddled with channels, caves, and chambers that form one of the most complex underground water systems on Earth, the Floridan aquifer. For millennia, the aquifer's natural pressure maintained in equilibrium. Fresh water pressed outward through the limestone matrix. The rock stayed stable, the surface held. Then came the 20th century, rapid urbanization, agricultural demands, millions of people pumping groundwater faster than rainfall could replace it. The pressure inside the aquifer dropped, and when that pressure drops, when the water that was silently propping up the rock from below begins to disappear, the limestone above it no longer has support. It collapses. Suddenly, completely, without warning. Florida has always had sinkholes. The state averages more than 200 new sinkholes per year, the highest rate of any state in the country. They swallow houses in Sevener. They open beneath swimming pools in Orlando. In 2013, a man named Jeff Bush was killed when a sinkhole opened beneath his bedroom in the middle of the night, the earth consuming him before anyone could react. But those were land sinkholes, visible, mappable, theoretically preventable. What is happening now is different. The geological stress has migrated. Decades of coastal development, seawalls, piers, hotels, parking structures, all bearing down on the limestone margin, combined with accelerated groundwater depletion and saltwater intrusion from rising sea levels, have created a catastrophic convergence. The limestone beneath the seafloor, already weakened by centuries of dissolution, is now receiving the final pressure it cannot absorb. It is not eroding, it is not shifting, it is dissolving from the inside out. And when the ceiling of a dissolution chamber can no longer hold its own weight, it does not sag, it drops. By noon on March 3rd, the number of confirmed offshore collapse zones reaches 17. The largest detected approximately half a mile southeast of Deerfield Beach, measures over 500 feet in diameter and is actively expanding. Sonar imaging shows its walls are still moving, sloughing loose material downward in what marine geologists are calling a cascade failure, where the destabilization of one layer triggers the failure of the layer above it. The beach at Deerfield is closed. Then Pompano. Then Lauderdale by the Sea. Then Fort Lauderdale's northern stretches. Emergency crews are working against a coastline that keeps reclassifying itself as dangerous faster than the closures can be posted. Inside the State Emergency Operations Center in Tallahassee, the maps being updated every 30 minutes show something that makes the room go quiet when it is first displayed on the main screen. The collapse zones are not random, they follow a pattern, tracing a fault line in the limestone shelf that runs roughly parallel to the coast at a depth of 30 to 60 feet. The geological term for it is a dissolution front, a zone where fresh water and salt water had been chemically reacting with the limestone for thousands of years, slowly eating it from within. That front is now failing all at once, triggered, scientists believe, by the combination of a particularly wet February recharging the aquifer rapidly after years of depletion, and a tidal anomaly caused by unusually high barometric pressure over the Atlantic that shifted nearshore water mass distribution. In plain language, the aquifer refilled too fast. The weight of the water rushing back in hit limestone that had already lost too much structural integrity, and it broke. For the families who were on those beaches, the geological explanation comes later. What comes first is chaos. The Meridian Reef Hotel in Pompano Beach receives its evacuation order at 11:17 a.m. It has 412 occupied rooms. Checkout was not scheduled until Sunday. Guests are given 45 minutes to collect their belongings. Some don't believe it. They've seen evacuation orders before, for hurricanes that never materialized, for storm surges that turned south. They take their time. They argue at the front desk. Then the ground shudders, not violently but perceptibly. A low, rolling vibration that moves through the floor of the lobby and up through the chairs, through the soles of shoes, through the wine glasses hanging behind the hotel bar, which rings softly against each other like a quiet alarm. Nobody argues after that. The lobby empties in 6 minutes. By 2 p.m., an estimated 19,000 people have been displaced from hotels, vacation rentals, and beachfront residences along the affected corridor. The southbound lanes of A1A, the iconic coastal highway that threads through Florida's eastern beaches, are converted to all northbound traffic. The images broadcast on news networks look like hurricane evacuation footage, except the sky is clear and blue and the sun is shining with the indifference of a perfect Florida afternoon. Several guests staying at a boutique resort in Highland Beach film what will become the defining visual of the event: a section of private beach, loungers still arranged in their morning setup positions, towels still draped across them, a sandcastle half-built by someone's child still standing, collapsing vertically into the ocean in under 4 seconds. The sound it makes, captured on the video, is not what people expect. It is not a crash. It is a deep, hollow exhalation, the sound of the earth emptying. The video accumulates 40 million views in 18 hours. The economic arithmetic of what is happening begins to surface within the first 24 hours, and it is staggering. Florida's tourism industry generates approximately $100 billion annually. Of that, a disproportionate share flows from the Gold Coast corridor, the stretch of Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties that is now at the center of the crisis. Hotel room bookings are being canceled in real time, not just in the affected areas but across all of South Florida, as uncertainty spreads faster than the geological data. The Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association estimates that for every day the affected beaches remain closed, the direct revenue loss exceeds $230 million. That figure does not include the cascading losses to airlines, car rental companies, retail, entertainment, and the thousands of service industry workers who depend on tourist spending. Property values are already moving. Real estate attorneys report that beachfront transactions that were under contract are being renegotiated or simply abandoned. Title insurance companies are flagging any property within 2 miles of the affected coastline. One major underwriter issues an internal directive halting all new coastal property commitments in Broward and Palm Beach counties, pending geological reassessment. The directive leaks. It doesn't help. But the economic damage, enormous as it is secondary to a question that serious geologists are now beginning to ask publicly, and that state officials are trying very hard not to answer directly. How far does this go? The Floridan aquifer does not stop at the Florida state line. It extends beneath portions of Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina. The dissolution front identified beneath Florida's coast is part of a carbonate platform geology that continues northward with varying degrees of structural integrity along the entire southeastern Atlantic seaboard. Dr. Fick, Marcus Okafor, a structural geologist at the University of Georgia who has spent 15 years studying the aquifer system's northern extent, gives a press briefing on the evening of March 4th that is measured in its language and deeply unsettling in its implications. He is careful not to use the word inevitable. He uses the phrase geologically plausible instead, paired with under sufficient stress conditions and given accelerated aquifer drawdown trends. What he is describing, in the careful grammar of scientific caution, is the possibility that what is happening in Florida is not an isolated event, that the same structural vulnerabilities, ancient limestone depleted aquifer pressure, accelerating sea level rise delivering saltwater into freshwater dissolution zones, exist to varying degrees beneath coastal Georgia, the Outer Banks of the Carolinas, and portions of the Virginia tidewater. He is asked directly, could this happen in other states? He pauses. He says, the geology does not respect state borders. The briefing ends. The clip plays on every major network. The headline writes itself. Back in Florida, the science is becoming personal. In the coastal community of Hillsborough Beach, a woman named Rosa Carvalho has lived in the same house for 31 years. She raised 3 children there. She buried her husband there. His ashes scattered from the pier that now lists at a 15-degree angle over a collapse zone flagged by emergency surveyors. She is told on the afternoon of March 4th that her home, though still structurally sound, sits within a mandatory evacuation perimeter that may not be lifted for months, perhaps longer. She packs what fits in 2 suitcases. She leaves the photographs. She says, to a reporter who happens to be standing in her driveway, something that is not a scientific observation or an economic analysis, but that captures, precisely, the human weight of what is occurring. The beach was always there. You never think the beach can leave. You think you might leave someday. You never think it leaves first. Across the closed coastline, variations of that sentiment repeat in different languages, different accents, from different front doors. The beach was always there. That is the baseline assumption baked into every mortgage, every retirement plan, every childhood memory attached to Florida's shore. The beach was permanent. The sand was fixed. The ocean was a boundary, not a mechanism. That assumption is no longer available. By the end of the first week, the United States Geological Survey has deployed a monitoring grid along the affected coastline, an array of ground-penetrating radar units, distributed fiber optic sensors capable of detecting micro-vibrations in the limestone substrate, and continuous GPS stations that can measure vertical land movement to the millimeter. The data they collect in the first 72 hours of monitoring reveals that the collapse is not finished. The dissolution front is still active. The cascade failure zones are still releasing material. The largest offshore sinkhole, the one southeast of Deerfield Beach, has expanded to nearly 700 feet across. A new collapse void. Smaller, but positioned uncomfortably close to the foundation zone of a condominium complex in Boca Raton, is identified on March 6 and triggers a second wave of evacuations. Engineers assessing the structural situation are honest in private and carefully diplomatic in public. The question being asked in closed briefings is not whether additional collapses will occur. The question is where and how large, and whether any engineering intervention is capable of meaningfully altering the trajectory. The preliminary answer, which nobody is eager to broadcast, is not at this scale. You can stabilize individual structures. You can inject grout into localized void spaces. You can manage, contain, slow. But the dissolution front spans 40+ miles of coastline and runs through geology that is literally underwater. There is no engineering solution to a Karst system in active failure mode at this spatial scale. What you can do is monitor, map, warn, move people out of the way. Florida has spent a century moving people toward the coast. It may now spend the next century helping them move away from it. There is a word that geologists use for what is happening, a word that carries more weight than it might initially seem to: readjustment. The Earth is readjusting. The limestone platform is readjusting to centuries of chemical dissolution and decades of anthropogenic stress. The coastline is readjusting to a sea level and a pressure equilibrium that no longer matches the one that existed when Florida's coastal development boom began in the 1950s. Readjustment sounds passive, clinical. It sounds like something that happens gradually, politely, on a geological timescale that doesn't intersect with human lifetimes. What is happening on Florida's coast is readjustment at speed, compressed by human decisions, by the pumping of aquifers, by the weight of cities built on limestone margins, by the slow intrusion of warmer, saltier water into geological formations that evolved over millions of years in a different ocean chemistry. The Earth is not malfunctioning, it is responding. It is doing exactly what Karst geology does when its equilibrium is disrupted at sufficient scale and speed. We disrupted it. The response is simply arriving faster than we modeled. The philosophical reckoning underway in Florida is not unique to Florida. It is a reckoning that every coastal civilization will eventually face in some form. The confrontation between the geological reality of where land ends and the human insistence on treating that boundary as permanent infrastructure. Coastlines move. They always have. In the deep time of geological history, Florida's coastline has been 200 miles further east during ice ages and tens of miles inland during warmer periods. The coast is not a fixed line. It is a negotiation between land and sea, one that has always been ongoing, one that human civilization interrupted by building on the negotiating table. The sinkholes along Florida's Gold Coast are not a failure of the Earth. They are a message from it, delivered in the blunt grammar of collapse, rather than the slow language of shoreline migration that we have been too busy to read for the past 70 years. The question is not whether Florida will lose more coastline. Based on what the geology is showing, it will. The question is whether the communities, the economies, and the political systems that have been built on the assumption of permanence can adapt to a coast that is and has always been in motion. The USGS monitoring grid is recording data. The dissolution front is still moving. The offshore sinkholes are still expanding. And somewhere along the 43 miles of closed coastline, where the yellow caution tape snaps in an Atlantic breeze over sand that may not be there next season, the Earth continues its readjustment. Patient, indifferent, ancient. It was here long before the hotels. And the geology strongly suggests it intends to make room for itself again.